Hello and welcome to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Acharya. On this show, we look at the ways leadership is evolving in our world and share stories from the most brilliant private equity executives, CEOs, thinkers, and doers defining our times. I'm your host, Linnea Jongnelius, and today I'm joined by David Acharya, managing partner with Acharya Capital Partners, a New York City-based PE firm that buys and grows lower middle market companies. He discovered his passion for the independent sponsor model after progressing over 25 years as a private equity investor with a fund and investment banker on Wall Street, thriving in the pace of change, alignment, and impact that he's able to bring forth, which are all areas we'll get into. David also serves on the board of ACG Global, the community for middle market deal making. In this episode, we'll explore the rise of the independent sponsor model, what makes it attractive, and mastering the art of deal sourcing and marketing. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Linnea. I'm very happy to be here.
David, give us the 60-second scoop on you.
Lifelong New Yorker, born and raised in New York City. I went to college in New York City, St. John's University out in Queens. Still live in the same neighborhood I grew up in as a child. Just love the city. I was a former investment banker, now a private equity person. You can kind of define me as, a Wall Street guy. Did it since I graduated from college, and I love it and have such a passion for it.
Yeah, what a great space and a great city. I just moved here in March myself.
Mm-hmm.
For any listeners that don't know, let's get into the fundamentals. What is the independent sponsor model? And more importantly, how does the model contrast from private equity, and maybe get into some of the structure and economics that are different?
So an independent sponsor model is related to private equity. We basically invest in growing companies using capital that we raise from investors on a deal-by-deal basis. This really differs from the private equity model where you do all the same things except tracking of the flows. So you start raising money up front, then you go out and search for companies. As an independent sponsor, you search for companies to invest in as well as raising money for that particular investment. So it's been great from an investor's perspective, from a fee perspective, and they have the ability to option in or option out of an investment that they'd like. With the private equity model, they're entrusting that decision-making to a group of investors that they may not have control over. So I think it's grown a lot in popularity. And I have to say, nobody's more surprised at the growth of the independent sponsor model than myself. Okay, I'm a former investment banker, worked for a private equity firm. If you came to me as a banker and said, hey, let's show this deal to David, and I'm like, why? He doesn't have a fund, he has no capital that he can speak of, and he has to raise the capital.
Yeah.
But I have to say it's grown quite a bit in the last decade, even probably a little more than that. A number of funds have grown to be focused on independent sponsors. When I talk to family offices and I say, hey, I'm an independent sponsor, I know exactly what it is. More importantly, Wall Street bankers has accepted us. I'm invited to numerous lower middle market M&A auctions, and bankers are so open to having meetings with me. So the model's here to stay. It's here to grow. And I think it'll continue to grow just given the structural benefits that investors have.
It has been an emerging channel, so curious your take on what makes it such an attractive option for sellers and for investors.
So from an investor's perspective, they have the optionality of putting their capital in an investment or not. You don't necessarily have that benefit or that confidence when you put in money in what's known as a blind pool. So if I come to you and I say, hey, I got this company, here's why I think you should put money in it, they'll look at it, they'll rely on my diligence, and they'll say, you know what, we like this business, we like you, we're going to allocate some money. If you give them a deal that they don't like, they have the optionality to walk out. And, that is, I think, a much more, if you're a fiduciary for capital, that you're in a much better position to do that. With the companies, I was very surprised how companies were open to working with independent sponsors. And I'm going to give you a story, what I got from a CEO recently. And it's a very similar story that I've gotten from CEOs in the past. You're an entrepreneur, just like me. You're not XYZ associates. You literally put your last name on the door. And that means I want to deal with you. Okay. Usually what happens with a lot of large private equity firms, a lead partner comes in, quote unquote, brings the deal in, hands it off to an investment team, and then the CEO doesn't see that partner unless there's a board meeting. In the independent sponsor structure, I don't hand the deal off to anyone. I'm responsible for sourcing the deal, for financing the deal, for performing due diligence, closing the deal, and basically making sure that we are meeting expectations according to our thesis and hopefully sell it for more than what we pay for. And there's nobody to blame except myself. And I think that model has really appealed to small and middle market companies. A very successful investment that I recently exited out of, I remember just talking to the CEO and I said, hey, when we first met, did you expect us to sell this company for all this money? And he said, I always knew we were going to do well, but one of the reasons why we went with you is I felt that we would get attention. With you, I can call you on a Thursday night, on a Friday night, and they have, and I've picked up the phone. And if there was a problem, I didn't hand it off to somebody. I'd had to solve it myself.
So I'm hearing a lot of personal ownership, a lot of personal attentiveness, involvement, and again, that inherent trust that builds with the CEOs and the entrepreneurs that you're working with.
Yeah, because I think investing, we have made it a transactional business. It's not. In investing is working with a team to grow a product, grow a service. I think in the transaction world, we're so easy to say, hey, we've done the job, here's our invoice, pay us, and we move on. I own the problem. I own it during good times. I own it during bad times. And when there's bad times, I'm expected by my investors to turn it around. And if it's good times, I'm expected by my investors to continue the trend. It contrasts with the transaction world. And I think, the difference between a good private equity investor and an excellent private equity investor is recognizing that and making sure that you don't think of yourself as a transactor, you think of yourself as an investor.
Sounds like it's a total fit with how you operate, what you like, sort of just a fit for you as you pivoted from the investment banking side to the independent sponsor side. Curious, as you've been in the role and you've seen a little bit of different parts of the universe here, what advice do you have for others that are thinking about this lane and potentially jumping into being an independent sponsor for the first time?
You need to have experience. You need to understand what it is to be an investor, how to value a company, how to build a model, how to do a deal. And no matter where you are, how lucky you are in life, you need to understand these fundamentals. On the personal front, it's important to note that you need a runway space. When you're an independent sponsor, you don't necessarily have a salary. You're responsible for your own benefits. You're responsible for your own physical and psychological well-being. So when I tell people I want to get into the independent sponsor business and they tell me they want to get into it, and I say, well, okay, do you have the personal runway space to do this? Suddenly you don't have a deal in, and I'd say you need at least, a year to two of runway space. You also need to have the fundamentals. We have a society that when people read about somebody being very successful in something, it attracts a lot of people. And I like to tell people, don't go for the glamour. A lot of people see the deal closings, they see the spending of the money and all that, and they see the pictures at the parties. What a lot of people don't see was the many, many trips that I've taken across the country and meet with a company, and you're like 20 minutes into the meeting, like, nope, this is not for us.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't see the so many no's that I've gotten from investors. They haven't seen the struggle with investment bankers and with companies to, convince them that you are a viable candidate. And then when you talk to service providers, you're like, well, I'd rather deal with the big firms than with somebody like you. So there's a lot of glamour in our business, but I always like to tell people, always think about, the unglamorous part of the business And you have to deal with that. And it's not easy for a lot of people.
So I'm hearing sort of a few lenses and filters, if you will. It's the purpose lens and what you want to be doing professionally. Also, you have to have the experience and the mastery professionally. But don't forget the personal piece. Does this fit your lifestyle? Does this fit what you want, how you want to live, and just how you run and operate as a person?
Exactly. You always have to be optimistic in this business, but you also are a fiduciary for investors. So you always have to think about what can go wrong.
Yeah.
Just how you look at an investment, you kind of have to look at life like that.
Yeah. I love that. Optimism, but combined with some scrutiny.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good segue, because I wanted to ask you also, as you think of the best and brightest independent sponsors, you've come across a lot of them. What separates the ones that are really, really good from the rest of the pack?
Experience, the ability to network and upgrade your skills. I meet private equity investors who were very successful in the 80s and 90s, and they never really upgraded their skills. And then they're wondering why they're struggling now. I think the world has changed, and the world continues to change. I think any good investor is a forward-looking person, not somebody who looks back. I've had successes in the 90s and 2000s, but I always like to say my greatest success hasn't come yet because I'm looking forward.
Best is yet to come. Also, you've recently had 2 very successful exits. One of those was Impact XM, the global event and experiential marketing agency, and you sold that off to the Riverside Company this December of 2023. I'd love to dive into the Impact XM story a bit. Could you just share sort of how you sourced the deal, the deal dynamics?
When I started my career as an investment banker, I was placed in what was then one of the most boring groups on Wall Street in the early 90s, telecom media. And technology wasn't as active as it is now. So I've always gravitated towards, what we call TMT, sector. And at a fund early in my private equity career, I was involved in the investment of more than 65 trade shows. And I would always ask the attendees and the sponsors, what do you hate about trade shows? And they said, we hate the booths because you have to have them. They're expensive.
Yeah.
Well, as a private equity guy, I heard recurring cash flow and high margins. So I started looking at what was called, back then was called trade show booth manufacturers, now experiential marketing. And at an industry event, I met an accountant and, we exchanged notes, we exchanged what we were looking at. And he's like, hey, I want to introduce you to this investment banker in Toronto, Canada. And I said, oh, great, love to meet more and more bankers. And I was telling this, and I finally had this call with this banker, introduced myself, kind of went through my background. And he said, hey, you talked about booth manufacturers. I got this nice little company, family-owned, based in Toronto, small company, fits within your criteria, and they're looking to partner up with a U.S. private equity firm. And I said, sure. I took the look at the book. By the time I got to the end of the book, I got so excited because I finally found a booth manufacturer experiential marketing agency that, I wanted to invest in. It ironically started at my previous firm. And, we didn't have any committed capital. And a mentor of mine, a very successful independent sponsor, called me out of the blue. It was like as if the Almighty was listening and saying, hey, I want to introduce you to this firm, Peninsula Capital Partners, a partner named James Ellickman.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, sure. More than happy to meet with them. I hosted him for a cup of coffee in my office in New York. And 20 minutes into the meeting, I said to myself, man, I really can work with this guy. So what I said is, hey, I got this nice little company. It's in a foreign currency. It's in Toronto. Are you, is your firm interested, can invest in something like this? He goes, oh, yes, we've done deals in Toronto. We exchanged information, called me up and said, hey, we'd like to work with you on this. And I said, great. And in December 2014, when I was still a partner at my previous firm, we closed this deal. And the thesis was to basically enter into the United States and take advantage of some of the positive headwinds in the experiential marketing agency. And we did it through complementary acquisitions. We did 8 acquisitions. We moved the headquarters from Toronto to Princeton, New Jersey. And we backed a great CEO who, the passion he has for this business just inspired me to continue to back him and push the opportunity among investors. We had to deal with the COVID. The one business that obviously got hit during COVID was any type of face-to-face, business, particularly trade shows.
Yeah.
And there we were, March of 2020. We're like, oh my God, the whole world stopped.
Yeah.
And nobody can go to an event. And we're in the business of manufacturing trade show booths.
An interesting situation.
So say the least. But the one thing I've learned in life, Alina, it's not being knocked down. You have to get up and you have to look forward. And ironically, we made a number of changes. I give the CEO a lot of credit here. And we were able to grow the company by the time we sold it by about 15x, cash flow.
Yeah.
And if you told me in March of 2020 that, 3 years later, we will be selling this very successful company to a great private equity firm, Riverside, I would say, you know what? I can dream, and I can hope.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to get too excited here.
Yeah. But tell us how you got there, right? Let's get into the value creation story. How did you improve the operation, scale the company, get through COVID, just infuse that resilience and agility into the business?
So the driver of any successful private equity company is the people. And the problem is it's very hard to measure it analytically. You can say, well, that person is rated a 5, that person's a 6, so let's back that. It doesn't work that way. And sometimes you can take somebody from a really successful company, put him or her in another situation, it may not necessarily work out. And then you take somebody who didn't really have such a great record at a large company, but put them in a different situation, and you find out they were a tremendous success. So we made sure we would continue to invest in the people. We had a great CEO. We expanded his team by bringing on a quality CFO, quality head of sales. We upgraded the existing operations team. We gave them technology. We gave them an internal system where everybody spoke to each other, both from a technology perspective, but also from a group perspective. And we did it through organic investing by hiring good people, but we also looked at competing organizations, and we also acquired them and integrated them into our system.
Yep.
And I think a combination of both made it a very successful exit.
That's such an important point, right? We know all too well in our world of executive recruiting how all of that looks. But talk to me a little bit about your approach to talent in general.
It is so hard. The playbook depends on the situation. You have to look for leaders who can create a culture that works for them and works for the company. The story is I worked at, and let's take Wall Street. I worked at one of the big firms, and now I'm at a smaller firm. And they try to copy that culture of that big firm to the smaller firm. And chances are it fails, okay? So I always say, how do you build teams, okay? And not just how do you build teams, but how do you handle the one person who is not a team player? For me, it's been a combination of coaching them. I always say there's a difference between coaching and training. Some people need training, some people need coaching. Sometimes things are so bad that you have to terminate their employment. I had a salesperson many, many years ago, top sales guy. He had a big problem from a cultural perspective, never really was a team player, and never really treated the opposite sex with the respect that they were supposed to get. And finally, I sat down with the CEO. I said, you got to let this guy go. It's not working out. He's like, he's my number one sales guy. I'm like, he's the number one sales guy now. Okay. What happens when people push back and the culture pushes back? And it was a calculated, I would say, risk, from the surface. But after he left, the amount of innovation, the amount of information that was flowing from one person to another person, the number of new clients that motivated his junior people to call grew, and sales grew, and cash flow grew, and that company was eventually sold to a very large media company. So there's no standard playbook. You have to look at each situation differently. And you have to also make sure that the expectations that you set is accepted by everyone in the room. There's a tendency to say, hey, PowerPoint presentation, here are the bullet points. You want everybody in the room to be part of that presentation so they understand that. And once you have that, more and more, you will find you will achieve greater levels of success. The areas where I don't see is when somebody walks in the room and says, Lenny, I want you to do it this way. Okay, thanks. And they walk out of the room. That is a setup for failure. But sitting down with them and saying something, so, Lenny, what do you think we should be doing? What are we missing? You're talking to the client. You're talking to the customer. You're out on the road. You're hearing all these things. What are we missing? And sometimes it could be more help. Sometimes it could be technology. Sometimes it could be an improved process. But by having you involved in the decision, you are creating value for the entire organization.
And when you sit down and you really listen, particularly with these lower middle market businesses, it always depends on the situation. But what are the common themes as you've listened again and again and again around the types of challenges they often or frequently face and deal with?
I always say that with lower middle market companies, there's not enough help. And then as such, what happens is sometimes you're focused on one thing, but you should be doing another thing to help the overall organization. So one of the first things we sit down and say, okay, so what are you missing? For example, Impact XM, great company, we were missing an industry-focused CFO, and we went out and got one. He did a really, really good job, and it is getting the right people into the right roles. What I've always found is there's not enough people. You're finding that the CEO is doing customer calls, then he's reviewing internal statements, and then he's, managing the sales meetings. And then he's also managing the administrative aspects of running a company. And they're like, well, wait a minute. Now, what you need is a CFO, you need a head of sales, and you need a chief operating officer, COO, that can help you. And, you do that either through hiring the right people, promoting from within, or when you acquire a company, one of the things you should look at is, am I getting a good management team that can supplement this?
Yeah.
With Impact XM, we bought a company that was based here in New Jersey that what we were missing, they had, and what they were missing, we had. It was a perfect puzzle as we put it together. Yeah. That's key. Because when you walk into a small middle market company, they just don't have the resources. When you're a small company, you don't have the marketing budget of an Apple, right? You don't have the brand name of a Goldman. You don't have the technology base of a Google or a Facebook. So it is making investments in the people to help grow the company.
And grow the company you did. So finally, how did you navigate to that successful exit?
We have held the company for about 10 years. We're long-term investors, but we're not that long-term. Okay? Investors want to get their money back.
Particularly right now.
Exactly. And we were prepared. We had a management team that knew that, we're not in this for the long run. We're owned by private equity. So we always ran the company as if we would sell very quickly. We just had to pick the right timing. COVID obviously delayed a lot of that timing. But, we kind of went to the marketplace, and I was really worried, okay? We're going through this crazy economy. We have rates rising. The lending markets slowed down a little bit. And in our industry, there weren't many tombstones, okay? Not many closed deals. And so there were not many comparisons. But we not only made sure that the team was prepared, but we hired an investment bank, that had a lot of experience in this industry, that knew who to go to and knew how to position the company, but also have the experience and the reputation to be believable in the marketplace. Remember, it was going to the marketplace. I would say we didn't highly publicize it, but we did approach, like any other M&A process, a large group of potential buyers. And Riverside put their best foot forward, and we decided to go forward with them. Very difficult time, but I would say what really worked in our favor is once, we sold the company, new investors, funds called me like, oh my God, you sent money back during this time period? Like, well, I didn't anticipate that as being a big benefit, but it's a lot of inbound phone calls now from investors trying to figure out, how I did it and, what's the next thing for you. So, but yesterday I had a call with a new investor. This afternoon, as soon as we're done with this interview, I'm going to meet somebody else. So, it's, I would say, a little bit of luck, but a lot of preparation.
I hear that, the preparation, also the network, right? And that's something I know you're just really personally passionate about, is building your network. And obviously this deal did come up through that network of yours, right? Both the investment banker that you ended up partnering with, also sourcing the deal itself. And curious, what marketing strategies do you find to be really effective personally for you and how you've built your career and also how you've fueled your deal making?
Everybody has a different strategy. Everybody has a different strength. I always felt the best thing that worked for me was face-to-face. Sitting down with you, kind of going through stories of both your professional story, but your personal story. The one thing I've learned about deal making is you spend a lot of time with people. And once you get to know them, the process of getting towards the finish line is a lot better. And because you had such a positive experience, you tend to go back to them for whatever service. And then leverage technology. We have LinkedIn. We have this great podcast. We have a very extensive CRM and a marketing team at my firm that will push out all types of news, all types of, I would say, engagements with the middle market community. And I find that to work for me. And then good old-fashioned phone calls. If I don't know a banker and I read about them, starting a group at a bank, I'll call them and I say, hey, think of me as you bring deals to the marketplace. And if I could be helpful to you, think of me. Yeah. Networking only works when you're relevant to both people. And if you walk into a scenario and say, well, I want this, I want this, I want this, but I'm not doing anything for you, you're just going to get bored and move on. And, you need, and I always like to say to people, like, when I meet somebody, am I going to be relevant to them and are they going to be relevant to me? And as much as I like to meet people, you cannot make time to meet everyone. Okay, so you have to kind of pick and choose what's very instrumental, to you. I love meeting people like you, Linnea, because you have a network of great executives. And one of those executives will be successful, will hopefully run one of our companies. And so that's why I want to meet with you. I want to see what the trends are, what's going on in the marketplace. So as I'm looking for these deals, I'm looking to parachute executives in. I'm going to think about you. I'm going to think about your business. Last week, I had to turn down a deal because the CEO wanted to leave. And I said, well, I told a banker I couldn't invest unless there was a CEO in place. You were the first person that popped in my mind. I'm like, well, let me talk to her, see whether she has a candidate she could potentially introduce me to. Yeah. So I always say, face-to-face networking goes a long way. Make sure you're relevant to everybody that's involved. Make sure you make a contribution to the community. Because I think if you make a contribution to the community, people see that. And that motivates them to call you. And that's how I think you expand your community.
I mean, you're speaking to something that's so close to my heart, right? You actually have to be relevant. But on top of that, like, you just have to care. Put the care in, put the commitment in, show up. Things tend to work out when you do those things, right?
Agreed.
One thing that you didn't mention, which is also so core to your background and your network and marketing strategies, is the Association for Corporate Growth.
ACG, yes.
where you've been very active. You ran the New York chapter. Now you sit on the global board. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So years ago, I had a really good boss, tough and he was fair. What made him a great boss is he also focused on my corporate ladder. You don't see many leaders do that. And I've always admired Mike, and I think very highly of him even till this day. He comes to me around 2006, 2007. He's like, hey, listen, you're great at, getting into the data room, doing the analysis, negotiating, but you need to figure out a way to now start sourcing your own deals and bringing them in and use your own relationships. So I signed you up for something called the Association for Corporate Growth. Finally, the secretary walks in and says, oh, by the way, you're going to this ACG event. And I said, okay. I looked at it and it was wine tasting. Like, the boss is sending me to an event to go for wine tasting. Like, I'm not going to argue with them.
Yeah, this is great.
It is absolutely great. And I remember I took a stack of business cards, went to this wine tasting, and I walked out with another stack of new business cards. I was such a rookie back then. I would take each business card saying, hey, nice to meet you. This is our investment criteria. If you have anything that you think we should be talking about, let us know. Within 3 to 6 months, I started being the number one deal sourcer for the firm. We were a small firm then, and I wasn't even a partner. And one of the partners, the main partner, said, yeah, and I went to this industry conference. Somebody said they met you at some Association for Corporate Growth event, and they're going to put us on Project XYZ's buyers list. And like, oh, that's great. And I became a member around 2009. And I would go to a bunch of events, meet quality people like you, Lydia, and exchange a lot of business cards. Around 2012, 2013, I got an email saying, hey, you should think about joining the board. And I remember at that time, I said, a lot of my success really came from ACG. Let me see whether this could be worthwhile for me. So I joined the board, and the first board meeting I had, I was, a word that's never associated with me, intimidated. I was in the room with all these middle market superstars from New York. I'm like, oh my God, she was quoted in that magazine and that guy was quoted in this magazine and he was on CNBC. And here I was, this guy literally with no committed capital, trying to do this crazy little thing called independent sponsors. I'm in this room. Little did I know that this extraordinary group of people would ask me to lead their chapter for a few years. And like any other situation, we try to do our best. During that time period, a lot of us who were on the board said, the most important member is missing. And like, who's that? It's like, it's the deal. We got to get the deal back in the room because that deal motivates you to come to an event, it motivates me to come to an event, and it motivates both of us to converse. There was a group of us, private equity people, investment banks, family offices, accountants, lawyers. We kind of got together and said, okay, we're going to make some changes. We are the largest chapter, so we have that benefit. We hold 40 events a year. This is New York City, so people fly in. It ended up being such a game changer for me personally that I'll always have fond memories of my work with ACG and work with the New York chapter. And then a few years ago, Global called and said, hey, we're trying to do the same thing across all the other chapters. You have a lot of experience. You can contribute. I said, sure. I'm more than happy to help out an organization that helped me build my business, build my brand, build my platform. So it's a lot of fun. And I just tell people in the middle market world, you need to network with people. ACG is a great platform for that. 59 chapters, 15,000 members, more than 1,000 events. And I think that's where you and I met.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we met each other there, and I've met so many other tremendous people as well. Let's switch gears. When you're not at work, tell us how you show up as your best self every day. Because you can't be a brilliant person at work, right, if you're not a brilliant person outside of work.
You can't be a brilliant person unless you're a brilliant person in all parts of your life.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I led a very career-centric life. As you get older, you realize, you can't necessarily recover as easily as you do, and you need to connect with people. And I think, investing in yourself physically, physical activity, but not just going to the gym, but trying out new activities here and there, expanding, taking care of yourself emotionally, I think is also key.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes different experiences, it's different cultures, and that's easy to do in New York City. The hardest thing to do is to avoid destructive situations, okay? That could be anything from, drugs and alcohol but I think the most destructive drug on this planet are people.
Mm.
And I'd say in the last 10 to 15 years, once I said, okay, this person's destructive, I would avoid that person.
Mm.
And when I look at people who are, I would say, not happy, it's not because, they're not in a good position in life. It's because the people around them are not putting them in a good position in life. And I was really, really fortunate enough just to have good family, good friends, good professional colleagues, even people who I just met. And remember that one night we got together at an ACG event, we learned something about each other, right? And we learned that you have such a great background, Linnea, and, to come in from another country, to come here, to grow up, and then move from one city to another city, that's impressive. But it was your ability to connect with people. And I saw that at that event. You talked to everyone, whether that person was a senior private equity person or was just a junior person trying to start his career. I always found, always surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
So take care of yourself physically, take care of yourself emotionally, and be open to other cultures, whether it is entertainment, languages, movies, or food. So easy to do in New York City.
Yeah. Take care of your relationships with
Exactly.
others and with yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any leaders that are inspiring you lately?
I hate to highlight one person. I admire everyone that comes into the office, does the work they're supposed to do to move the industry, to move the project. Years and years ago, when I was in investment banking, I worked with a guy named Jimmy Lee, legendary banker. And every Monday morning, we'd have this Monday morning meeting where the global investment banking team would get together in this very large auditorium and we'd review deals, we'd review what was going out there. And he always likes to say, I want all of you to get up in the morning and do your best and then do it every day. Oh my God. I mean, it is so simple, so hokey. But yet, if you follow that simple philosophy, you will have large blocks of achievement in your life, whether it's professional or personal. Another leader, said to me, never, ever, ever give up. Okay. And people give up and they don't. And he said to me, never, ever give up. He is a New York City real estate developer who's now trying to get a job in federal government. Okay. But he said that to me personally.
Yeah. I think Winston Churchill may have said that too.
Oh, I'm sure.
He also said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yes.
Where else do you draw inspiration from? Are there any books, podcasts, quotes, content?
I like to read everything. I don't know if I can point to a particular area. I read a number of online newspapers, a number of magazines from all around the world. I like to read stuff about popular culture, but I also like to talk to people. Sitting down with you and then saying, okay, you did this, you did that. What did you do here? What attracted you to this? Because I think, to be a good investor, you need to know where the pulse of the market is. And to know that is you need to read as much as you can, absorb as much as you can, listen to as much as you can, and interact with as much as you can. And I use technology for that. I mean, I read about 20 books a year. If you come to my house, you would think I don't read because I don't have a bunch of books lying around. But, you pick up my iPad and it looks like a library.
Now, if you walked into my place, you would see books everywhere. I'm a sucker for a good old copy from a bookstore.
You go to the Barnes & Nobles down on 5th?
No, but I should.
Yeah, it's a great building.
Yeah, I love asking people what they're reading all the time. So we're getting close to the finish line here, and in every episode, we like to define brilliance in a few ways. So we're going to do a fun lightning round of questions. If you could please fill in the blanks.
Sure.
Purpose is?
Purpose is to find joy, contentment, and satisfaction in my personal and professional pursuits and relationships.
Leadership is?
Leadership is the accomplishment of a goal through the direction of people.
Success is?
Success means something different for each individual. For me, it is financial stability, positive reputation in my industry, and strong family and personal connections.
Brilliant leaders are?
Brilliant leaders have integrity, compassion, determination, and they educate themselves.
I perform at my best when?
I perform my best when I'm sleeping well, eating well, exercising regularly, connecting with people, engaging in meaningful hobbies, and making time for personal reflection.
Thank you to David Acharya of Acharya Capital Partners for joining us on today's episode. I hope all of you walk away inspired to pursue your passion and make middle market deals happen, particularly if you are an independent sponsor. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. That's it for this episode of the Brilliant People Podcast. I'm Linnea Jongnelius. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. And follow Assertitude on LinkedIn for the latest insights on how to lead and perform at your best. Until next time, stay brilliant at work.